Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a Sunday ahead of the 2022 training camp. We're going to preview every position battle that we think it is. Well, not every position battle, obviously, but the relevant ones that we have, of course, a lot to talk about. And then ultimately, we are going to pick a winner or give a prediction of who wins the battle, if you will. So, gonna be a fun one. Can't wait to see how it all shakes out. Joining me to do that are my guys Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you, man. How are you doing this morning?
Doing good. Unfortunately, we did have to cut the Brandon Peters Easton Stick QB3 battle. It was cut for time. We do have a long show planned with plenty of position battles, but that one, unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about.
Yeah, that one is going to be an interesting one, I guess. Brandon Peters. I got to study Brandon Peters for the undrafted free agent episode, and it was not pretty. So
I watched the Brandon Peters game, the 9 overtime game against Penn State, or however many overtimes that was, and that was enough for me.
Yeah. Tyler's here as well, man. Tyler, how you doing?
Ready to go, ready to rock. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing good. So yesterday, of course, we did our Q&A. We're talking about movies to watch and things like that. And Brooke and I debated going to see Nope. But after the way that you guys talked about it yesterday, I figured I'd wait a little bit and let the dust settle for some more reviews to come out and things like that. So we ended up staying home. We went out to dinner and we watched Dune. And I watched Dune when it came out, but Brooke did not. And I forgot how long of a setup and a runway that movie has. And so about an hour and a half in, Brooke fell asleep. So that was our Saturday night.
Yeah, it's definitely a long one. And boy, I don't know if I'd watch it at home. I mean, I really liked it watching it in theaters, but once you get to the home setting and you've already seen it, I just fall asleep.
Still haven't seen it.
Yeah, so it's clearly setting up a second movie, but it was quite long. A lot of scenes that I was like, okay, I don't remember this being this dragged out, but it's all good. So it is what it is. All right, so we are, like I said, we're going to preview training camp position battles, a lot of running back talk, offensive lineman talk, defensive lineman talk, some secondary talk. So we're going to preview every position battle that we have information on. We'll go through some of what we think are like pros and cons, if you will, of each player that is relevant in this battle. So very interested to see how it shakes out. So we're going to start by sharing a visual with our audience here that is live and, of course, watching on YouTube. For our audio audience, we'll, of course, try and explain everything as much as we can. So we're going to start with the running back position. We do have a Google presentation up, so we'll each kind of put in our winners and losers here. So, we've had a lot of time to kind of marinate on the Isaiah Spiller pick at this point. So he obviously is vying for the running back 2, running back 3 spot. Of course, you also have Joshua Kelly, Larry Roundtree, Kevin Marks, and Letty Brown, which obviously means Austin Eckler locked in for RB1. So Tyler, we'll start with you. I feel like it's almost a foregone conclusion that Spiller is RB2, but I guess the way that we can frame this here for him specifically, I mean, we've seen the Chargers draft 3 running backs in 3 years. We were all excited about Joshua Kelly. Some of us were excited about Larry Roundtree last year. How confident are you that Isaiah Spiller does ultimately end up being a different RB2 for this team?
I feel like one of us was excited for Larry Roundtree last year. I don't know if Alex was on the other end of that for sure, and I was somewhere in the middle.
I was actually a big fan of Larry Roundtree. Still a big fan.
Yeah, that's great. How confident am I that he can be different? It's tough because I didn't watch Joshua Kelly, so I don't know how I didn't watch a lot of him, so I don't know how he transitioned to the NFL.
Joshua Kelly at UCLA, you mean?
Yeah. What did I say?
No, I was just.
Oh, yes, at UCLA. Yeah. So I don't know what he had and why it hasn't quite translated to the NFL. So I don't know, if Isaiah Spiller has like the same strengths or something, and then maybe those weaknesses show up in the NFL. I don't know. But I'm very confident he can work out in the NFL. I do like what he can do on third down. I think that just keeps him very safe, very solid. I think he's a smart player. I think he's an elusive player. He played in a very, very tough conference. So I have all the faith in the world that he'll be at worst better than the other 2 running backs that they drafted, but that bar is pretty low.
Yeah, Larry Roundtree played in a really tough conference too, all those yards. I'll say that Spiller is, he's RB2. I don't think they have another choice at this point. You invested that 4th round pick in him. The real question is kind of what happens behind him, and I guess how fast he gets like those permanent RB2 snaps, if you will, right? Because I do still think Roundtree and Kelly, while Spiller is getting stuff going, probably will still have a decent portion of snaps, and then I think you'll see Spiller start to kind of rise throughout the season in terms of his snap counts and everything. So yeah, he's RB2. They need him to be RB2. He easily, out of their current group, has the highest athletic upside, and is probably the best runner in terms of direction. Holds onto the football. I think we're all in agreement here.
Yeah, we are. I think if you're talking about them as prospects, right? Like I think the thing with Joshua Kelly was that, he didn't have a ton of mileage on his tires, if you will. He was relatively inexperienced at the position, of course, being a UC Davis transfer to UCLA. And when he was at UCLA, he was a great player. He was like their whole source of offense. And then, he goes down to the Senior Bowl, has a great Senior Bowl week, and ends up getting drafted, of course. But there were similar traits between Spiller and Kelly out of college. I think, contact balance was a similar trait that they would share. The thing with Kelly was just like the vision was just not there. And we've seen that ultimately come to fruition in the NFL. And of course, you never really saw him display a diverse route tree or really any kind of pass catching experience at UCLA, which Chip Kelly generally likes to kind of separate his running back room into this guy is carrying the ball, this guy is going to be our pass catcher. And Joshua Kelly's pass catching running back was Demetric Felton, who of course has been drafted and has been a pretty successful, supporting running back for the Cleveland Browns. But with Spiller, like there's no doubt in my mind that he at least can be a capable 3rd down running back. And I think that just gives him a little bit more value than the other guys. So I absolutely agree that he is RB2. The interesting one, of course, comes for RB3 and RB4. Alex, we'll start with you here. What kind of criteria are you looking for or basing this conversation or debate on for the other 2 running back spots?
Who's less bad?
Yeah,
pretty simple. I guess for RB3, I'm going to put in Larry Roundtree. I don't really have a lot that I'm basing this off of, and I think that you're seeing both Roundtree and Kelly ultimately kind of get demoted in a sense.
Less bad sorry, Alex, I'm just laughing.
I don't know. I mean, Roundtree has special teams value. He can at least contribute in that way. Probably a better short yardage back than Joshua Kelly. Other than that, I mean, we're talking about RB3 and RB4 here. I'm just kind of going on the basis that Roundtree is a Brandon Staley draft pick. Has more time in his contract. Joshua Kelly, if there would be a running back who's going to be cut in favor of a Marks or Brown, I don't think it's going to happen. It would probably be him. So at this point, I think Larry Roundtree is probably the RB3. Get some red zone carries here and there. I think that's probably the situation the Chargers are in. And maybe towards the beginning of the season, him and Spiller split a little bit more. And then, like I said, I think Spiller, starts to really get those carries, as he earns them throughout the season. But the Chargers just invested too much capital in Spiller for him to have a big role. But I still think, they did draft him in this Staley administration. So I'm going to put Roundtree at RB3.
Yeah. This is just, there's so many different layers here, right? Because Larry Roundtree won the RB2 position coming out of training camp last year. He was kind of the guy, for the first few weeks of the season that was getting the bulk of the carries. And of course, Justin Jackson kind of emerged midway through the season. So Roundtree and Joshua Kelly were always kind of battling it out for that 3rd spot, as they kind of are again this year. So just going through the numbers, right? Roundtree had 36 carries, 87 yards on the season for 2.4 yards per carry, 1 touchdown. He had 1.97 yards after contact per attempt. He forced 3 missed tackles and had 1 carry that went for longer than 10 yards. Joshua Kelly had 33 carries, 102 yards on the season for 3.1 yards per carry, 0 touchdowns, the 2 fumbles. He averaged 2 yards per contact after attempt. He forced 5 missed tackles and had 2 carries over 10 yards. So very similar players in terms of like production. Like no one really ever edged themselves out over the other one. Joshua Kelly, of course, had the fumble issues. Larry Roundtree just kind of never really could find his rhythm. I mean, of course, he popped off a couple big runs. A couple big runs got called back because of holdings. So it's a tough spot. I generally lean that Kelly is the better player, but it's just the fumbling issues for me that are like holding me back. So I think if you are trying to kind of, talk yourself into an RB3, I think you probably would prefer like the more, I guess, stable or consistent player after Spiller, because Spiller, he is so young. He is a rookie running back. So I think that's Roundtree, but I don't know, man. What do you think, Tyler? Where are you at here?
I don't even know. Like this one is just give me a coin and I'll toss it and we'll see what happens. Because, okay, so if I'm just looking at what happened last year, right? Kelly, it was pretty early in training camp and pretty obvious. It was Eckler, Jackson, Kelly, Roundtree, and then Bradwell. And it was basically like that the entire way. At the scrimmage, Kelly was the clear RB3. And then suddenly the season starts and it's Larry Roundtree starting. It's like, oh, okay, interesting. Or, RB3 starting.
Yeah.
And then we get to a certain point in the season, like, okay, here we go. Larry Roundtree did really well against the Raiders, like really ground out some tough yards. And I think like the next week it was Josh Kelly. It was like, wait, what happened? And then it'd be Roundtree, and it'd be Kelly, and then it was Bradwell for against the Broncos or whatever. So what a weird situation. And you guys are actually kind of convincing me though, because I think Kelly, I do think Kelly, honestly, based on how the season finished, is the safer back. But because they drafted Spiller, I think Roundtree is now the back you should prioritize, I guess, because like what you talked about, like a nice, stable, hopefully better runner, like a decent runner of the football. I think like there are things that you can see in the runs that were called back, right, against the Chiefs, against the Steelers, against the Vikings. I think there are good things there. It just never really came together, or there was penalties. So I think someone like Roundtree, if you want someone who can grind out tough yards, that's not really Eckler, and it even wasn't statistically last year, even though he is very tough. And it's not Spiller. Spiller is not a grind out the yards kind of guy. It's not sexy, but Roundtree does potentially give you that. Still so much unknown. I do think Joshua Kelly was kind of he was their favorite heading into the end of the year. And I do think that this couple of, unique and good looking receiving plays that he had, one against the Broncos, one against the Texans, very elusive, something that they just didn't have in Roundtree. I think that makes him stand out, but this position's a mess. I'm going to go with Roundtree as RB3, but I don't really feel great about it. And I'm only doing that because I think he's less redundant with Spiller and Eckler.
Oh man. See, I was like waiting for you to kind of sway me in one way or the other. And then I kind of just like was thinking about this, and I think I'm going to pick Kelly, man. I think at the end of the day, I think we've just seen the more highs from Kelly than we have from Roundtree. Like, I mean, we heard in 2020 from, obviously none of us were there, but several beat writers said that Joshua Kelly was like one of the best players on the team in 2020 during training camp. We've seen some really great play out of him. It's just we've also seen some really bad play. So I think where I'm leaning at the end of the day is just choose the more talented player, and then maybe kind of RB4 you sort out the special teams aspect of it. So I'm going to go with Kelly for RB3 just because I believe he is the more talented player right now.
Yeah, and I could totally see that. And I think based on what they've showed us, he really is the RB3 and was to start training camp. I'll do the same thing as Alex. It really doesn't matter.
I mean, look, you said flip a coin earlier, and that's how the coaching staff viewed it last year. I mean, Joshua Kelly played a little bit more down the stretch, but ultimately every week, either one of them was a healthy scratch, or maybe they took 4 running backs into a game in some situations. But I think that if Eckler and Spiller are clear 1-2, then it's probably just going to be matchup dependent and week to week in terms of which one's playing, in terms of which one's on the roster in case something happens. So I could see Kelly Roundtree, I could see Roundtree Kelly. Neither of them have breakout potential because they use the pick on Spiller, and Spiller's RB2.
Sure.
So you could do whatever order you want.
Yeah, I'm not feeling super great about the undrafted free agent backs potential. I mean, if Lady Brown makes it, awesome. I absolutely think one of these guys could. I think they're going to roll with their 4 again.
I feel great about Marks. I don't think the coaching staff cares. That's kind of where I am at the end of the day. Maybe something happens in the preseason or training camp that changes that. But ultimately, I think they probably roll with their 4 running backs. Maybe there's a world where they go 3 running backs, 1 fullback. I'd like to see that just because I don't think you need 4 running back slots. But I think we're probably getting the 4 running backs again.
Everett O'Neill. Yeah, Justin Jackson would be nice if he came back. That would be fantastic. I guess the only thing here to consider, any chance that the Chargers would pick up a veteran that gets cut. I think there are a few, running back rooms that are a little oversaturated. Of course, the Cleveland Browns come to mind. The Miami Dolphins come to mind. Any chance you think that, if a guy like Myles Gaskin or Dearness Johnson, Kareem Hunt, whatever the Browns decide there, get cut, that the Chargers would pick them up to be RB3?
I think Dearness is the only one that would give them any kind of change to their roster. Otherwise, I think they're just going to, like Lynn era, they'll pick up any random running back. We'll get Kenyon Drake, we'll get Tremont Pope, whatever. This regime, I just think they're going to kick, like with the way they did it last year, they're going to stick with their guys. So I think unless it's Dearness Johnson, which would be awesome, and then of course everyone's going to want him. Other than that, I don't think they make a change, honestly. Wow, so none of us have an undrafted free agent making the roster.
I just need to see it, whatever it would be in preseason or training camp, and we haven't really heard Staley or anyone else on the staff be like, "Oh, we're in love with that guy." So that's kind of why I don't have one.
Yeah, for now I'm just putting Roundtree. I just think that's going to be like the special teams back spot, and I think Kevin Marks has a legitimate chance, but like Alex, I need to see it. So this is a roster prediction, but I feel like this one specifically is probably the most one that I feel is going to be changed by what we see.
Yeah, and I hope so.
Yeah. It would be nice to see one of these undrafted free agents come out and just like be the better player and just, earn that spot, even if it's RB3. I don't necessarily have a horse in this race. Just somebody good, prove that they can earn this spot and, provide some good depth behind Eckler and Spiller.
Yep, 100%.
All right, we'll move on to the next position, which I believe is wide receiver. Okay, I was going to think it was fullback, but it's not. So this is specifically wide receiver 3. Of course, you have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams locked into their roles as 1 and 2. So vying for this spot, of course, you have Josh Palmer, Jalen Guyton, DeAndre Carter. And then you kind of have the other guys, Jason Moore, Maurice French, Michael Bandy, Joe Reed, and Trayvon Bradford. So we are kind of basing this based off of snaps as opposed to who comes in and gets like the most targets. Although that could be theoretically the same player. So just kind of looking at the numbers from last year. Of course, you had Jalen Guyton was kind of the wide receiver 3 last year. He only edged out Josh Palmer by 1 target. However, he did have a little over 120 more snaps on the season than Josh Palmer. Of course, they did ease in Palmer throughout the season. And then really in the back half of the season was when Palmer really started to get his opportunity. So, Alex, we'll start with you on this one. Where are you at with wide receiver 3? What are you expecting to see from Guyton, Palmer, DeAndre Carter, who was your breakout pick, and any of the other guys?
This one's tough. I think for now it's still Guyton. I could see Palm. Could the answer be different by the end of the season? Sure. I mean, Guyton only ended up beating Palmer, like you said, by 120 snaps last year. So if you see, Palmer getting more comfortable in the system, him being a Herbert preferred target, then you could sort of see that start to even out. I just think the Chargers have a speed problem and like a getting deep problem in their wide receiver room. I mean, they don't really have anyone that creates speed quite in that way. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer can't do what Jalen Guyton does. So therefore they need Jalen Guyton to be there. It would be a little bit different if like a Tyron Johnson or somebody like that was still on the team. And then, maybe one of them would kind of be redundant. I could see Palmer again overtaking wide receiver 3, but for now, especially because of how often we've seen Mike Williams banged up, maybe Palmer will have to slot up in that role as well. Sometimes Keenan Allen, has a hamstring thing, so maybe Palmer would have to step in that capacity as well. Guyton to me is the one wide receiver that no other wide receiver can really step in for in creating that deep separation, and he also improved as a blocker, as a route runner last year, especially in the intermediate range. So for me, starting the season, I would say that it's Jalen Guyton, even though by the end of the season, especially, as we hit restricted free agency with Guyton next year, it could very well end up being Palmer. And Herbert has talked about how much he loves Josh Palmer and his development as well. But for now, just because of the intangibles and because of the speed aspect, I'm going to go with Guyton still.
Yeah, I think when you open training camp, you're going to have Jalen Guyton as the starter, or like the 3A, however you want to classify it. I think Josh Palmer, like I really changed my mind rewatching the plays, and just even though I wasn't watching him, there's just something special about him. And I think they don't have a speed element with Guyton out really. But I do think that with Mike Williams running, 40% of his routes being go routes, and I honestly think Keenan Allen is a tremendous downfield wide receiver that doesn't get used enough. If you can kind of work in Josh Palmer, who did sort of mimic Mike Williams with the go routes, I think he's too talented. Like I think there's the right answer is Guyton, but I think Palmer's going to make it impossible for them to put Guyton on the field. I think that Palmer is just going to make enough plays and look good enough, and he will. I'm sure in training camp he's going to be the most talked about player. He was almost last year because he looked incredible, and I think this year it's just going to look like that again. I think Palmer is the better of the two players. Guyton may be the more important player, depending on what they want to do. But I think you can manufacture enough downfield, even downfield with Everett, downfield with Carter, that I think Guyton's role is a little less maybe important. I think Palmer just being the better of the two players. I actually think Palmer is going to be the wide receiver 3, which I wouldn't have said a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think the thing for me that like maybe kind of swayed me one way or the other here is the thing that Teresa pointed out, that Jalen Guyton's now having a larger role on special teams and potentially playing gunner and things like that. We haven't really seen him get many opportunities in that regard because he was like their wide receiver 3. He has been that guy. So, I mean, he's still going to have a role for sure. And I think he's still going to get, his 25, 30 snaps a game just because of that speed element. The only other guy in this group for me that has like a deep speed profile would be Maurice French, which we haven't really seen anything from him, of course, in the NFL. So that's just all based off of like his athletic testing and what he did in college at Pittsburgh. But I do think we see Josh Palmer take on a significantly larger role this year. He essentially, so he got 457 snaps on the season. So, you're talking about, make sure my math is right here. Yeah. So you're talking about 25 snaps a game essentially last year. And I think this year you're talking about like 45 per game. So I'm going to go Palmer as well. But like I said, I still think that Guyton is going to have a role. To me, this is almost more like a 3A, 3B situation.
Yeah.
In terms of snaps. But I think Palmer, I feel good about him getting like 650, 700 yards on the season if everybody is healthy, of course. But I think Palmer's going to have a huge role this year.
Yeah, I think Palmer's going to cause a controversy this year. I think we're going to be worried about Mike Williams' contract. I just feel good about Palmer.
That would be, I'm sure the anti-Mike Williams guys will be very happy if that controversy happens.
I mean, is it really a controversy if he's only here on like a 2-year deal, basically? Like, I don't know if it's that much of a controversy. It's not like he's here on like a 4-year. He's locked in for 4 years. I mean, Telesco basically gave him a 3-year. That's a 2-year. So, I mean, if they wanted to move on from him in that respect, if Palmer breaks out, they still could.
Yeah, I guess it's more like let's watch Trey Pipkins block, and we could have given the money to another right tackle, but we're going to watch Mike Williams. And then we could have just had Josh Palmer. That's unfair to both Williams and Palmer because that would be so quick this year. But I think at some point we're going to have a discussion where it's like, maybe Palmer should have been the guy.
Yeah, I mean, we all figured that Palmer would be the Mike Williams replacement eventually. He at least was drafted to be Mike Williams' insurance. And then I think Williams kind of had a better season than any of us really expected, especially after Joe Lombardi threw out a Michael Thomas comparison. So, like I said, all 3 of these guys are going to have a big role for this team. But yeah, this is kind of how I see it. So we'll move on to the next one here. The hot topic conversation, of course, the right tackle position. We've heard a lot of positive buzz for Trey Pipkins recently. Duke Manyweather has been kind of pounding the table. I heard from a source that Pipkins looks great. He's had a fantastic offseason. Not really much buzz about Storm Norton this offseason. Really, all the focus there has been kind of on what Storm does not do very well. So we'll see, of course. And then you have the other guys that they claimed Zach Bailey off of waivers. Foster Sarrell was an undrafted free agent that they claimed after training camp cuts last year, I believe. And then Andrew Trainer is an undrafted free agent as well. Tyler has, for our audio audience locked in, is his anxiety. So there's that. I'll start this one off, I guess, because I think for me, I'm just kind of trying to figure out what the Chargers are necessarily looking for and what would give one of these players an edge over the other ones. And I think if you're looking at both of their weaknesses and strengths, they share a lot of similarities in terms of what their weaknesses are, and that's a lot of hand placement issues. It's a lot of lunging and kind of trying to make sure that you get both of your hands on an opposing rusher at the same time. That gave Storm Norton a ton of problems against Micah Parsons and Max Crosby and other things like that. So Pipkins has been the same way, and Pipkins has talked about that. Daniel Popper did a great article about the issues that he has had. So reportedly, Trey Pipkins has been fixing those issues with Duke Manyweather. So I guess ultimately this is really Trey's job to lose, just like it was last year. I feel like that swing tackle spot was Trey's to lose heading into the offset or heading into training camp in the preseason, and he lost it. Like, I think that is an important context point to make sure that we discuss, because I mean, you're talking about a guy who gave up, I think, 6 pressures against the Seahawks in the preseason game last year. So last preseason was not pretty, and it was pretty clear that Pipkins was the worst tackle when compared to Storm Norton, at least in the preseason games that we watched last year. So I feel like it's the same situation this year. If Pipkins can show that he did improve and he solves those issues, then I think it's his job. And if he doesn't prove that he's the guy, then they'll go right back to Storm Norton, just like they did last year. So I think right now you have to put in Pipkins, but again, like, we need to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, it's the world's worst disastrous start to a preseason I've ever seen. I mean, the whole 3-game stretch was a sack allowed a game, 3 pressures allowed a game, a penalty a game against guys that they didn't make the roster or they barely made the roster. But things have changed. It's a lot of sight unseen. We're kind of making this call based on things that we assume are happening, that we've heard are happening or have happened. But again, Norton, like, if he were anything close to half decent, not a conversation. But he was so bad that it has to be a conversation. And now we're at a point where I do think it is Pipkins. I mean, Steven, do you want to say who said the nice things about him? Because I think they provide some context.
No, I'd like to. Okay.
I
don't know. Should I?
I mean, does it matter?
I don't think it does. I would like to keep that to myself personally.
Okay.
And NSN asking if Pipkins can improve, why can't Storm? I think that is an important conversation to ask. I think you're really just talking about like natural athleticism. Pipkins had a great RAS score. That was really like why he got drafted as early as he did, was just like, hey, there's really no more tackles that we think have this kind of upside, so let's just take a chance on these athletic traits. And I don't think really Storm has that. I think Storm is, a little bit longer, a little bit taller, but I just don't think he has the athletic upside that Pipkins does.
I mean, Storm's also 28, Trey's 25. So,
Yeah.
I mean, again, Storm's not old, but if you were to bet on one of those guys to like have a breakout season or something, it would probably still be Trey Pipkins, especially considering how raw he was when he came into the league. So for me, I'd probably just say Trey Pipkins in that respect is more likely to improve if you have to pick between them. Again, like Tyler said, this is a lot of sight unseen. We're, kind of, I guess, stretching it here to say like, okay, Trey Pipkins looks better, or people are saying he looks better. That Seahawks game, by the way, was one of the worst games I've ever watched last year. And anytime they had anything positive happen, it would be like they score a touchdown and then Vizcaino like kicked an extra point like 20 yards to the right.
Yeah.
I remember that. Chase Daniel just like kept getting barraged. It was such a bad game. But yeah, no, I think Pipkins has to kind of be the starter in a very similar way to what Teresa was saying in the chat, which is like, kind of already saw what Storm is, right? I mean, like Storm can play some good games where he allows 2 or 3 pressures, but he's going to have that gargantuan game where he gives up 8 or 9, right? And that's just something that the Chargers can't stomach, I think, if they're to be a contender in 2022. Pipkins may end up having those games as well, which is why I think it's very important. As Steven said, it's Pipkins' job to lose, and he could very well lose it, like he did last year, whether that's in the preseason training camp phase, whether that's, week 5, he has a really bad game and they decide to put Storm in the next week. That could still happen as well. Or they go out and they sign a right tackle theoretically midseason. I wouldn't be shocked by that either. But based on everything we've heard in the building, based on what the beat reporters are saying, based on the work with Duke Manyweather as well, and sort of the perceived improvement of Trey Pipkins, I don't think there's any other answer here from week 1, but almost in the same way that we were talking about wide receiver 3 with Guyton and Palmer, this could change by the end of training camp. This could change by the end of week 4, right? Where, you start to see these changes, or maybe Pipkins just isn't playing well. But right now, hard to put anyone else other than Pipkins as the starter for now.
Yeah. So a couple questions in terms of like expectations here. Like Alex is saying, the Chargers don't need a great right tackle by any means, and I think that has influenced their decision making, especially drafting Zion Johnson, and you have 4 other really good to great offensive linemen, depending how you feel about Matt Filer and depending how quick you think Zion Johnson hits the ground running. So they don't necessarily need an elite tackle at right tackle. Of course, that would be fantastic, right? But like Alex is saying, you just need somebody who's going to avoid the snowball game where you're blocking Micah Parsons and you get just beat a couple times and that turns into 9 pressures, or Max Crosby turns into 10 pressures. Like that's the thing that you need. And I always harken back to like Sam Tevy, and what we always wanted to see from Sam Tevy was just get rid of the avalanche games, and like you're fine because you see good football in other opportunities. And Pipkins had this issue in 2019 when he was a rookie. Of course, some of that's unfair. Also in 2020, and Storm Norton had this issue last year. So whoever is just the most consistent, I think, is ultimately going to win this position. Maybe they go out and sign a Riley Reif or a Darrell Williams if both of these players are still just really struggling. But I think it would have to be like a truly last case resort. Like we don't feel good about either of these players heading into the season.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say last point, when it comes to like the schedule and stuff, and you look at the teams the Chargers are playing, at least early on in the season, we're going to find out like pretty quickly whether Pipkins can hold on to that job or whether it's going to go to someone else, because just the first couple of weeks of the season, Vegas week 1, Chandler Jones and Max Crosby, Kansas City week 2. I know we don't like love Frank Clark on this show, but I mean, he's decent. And then you have George Karlaftis there. Jacksonville, Josh Allen, and then Cleveland, I mean, Myles Garrett. So like you're going to figure out whether this, right tackle situation is going to survive with Pipkins as the starter, or they decide to throw Storm in or go in some other direction, I think fairly quickly.
Hey man, Trey Pipkins low-key kind of owns Frank Clark, so he's like the only defensive end in the NFL that he can play well against. So
whopping 1 game sample size on that one. So
two
two
from his rookie season and from last year. So I'm just saying.
I'll hold out on that for a bit.
Mostly being facetious right there. All right, let's move on to.
Oh.
Sorry, Tyler. What?
Oh, sorry. In 2020, Pipkins only allowed 1 pressure against the Chiefs. I'm surprised.
Oh, so there's 3 games sample size against Frank Clark. There we go.
Ooh.
All right, let's move on to the next spot here. Obviously, the Chargers' interior offensive line in terms of starters are settled, locked in. Of course, you have Matt Filer, Corey Linsley, and Zion Johnson, who will be the starters. The position battles are interesting. I think we all agree that Will Clapp will be the backup center. That's what he was signed to be. The interesting debate, of course, is who's going to be that swing offensive lineman if either of the guards get injured and what they do there. So vying for those spots, of course, you have Brendan Hymas, who was drafted last year, Jamari Sawyer, who was drafted this year, Ryan Hunter, who low-key had a good preseason last year, and I was kind of excited for him to see what he could do this year if he's given a chance. And then you have Isaac Weaver, who is another undrafted free agent. So this ultimately for me is going to come down to really health of Jamari Sawyer, because we've heard about the knee issue. We've heard that he's healthy. But I think Jamari Sawyer is the more talented player, and I think he is the guy that I would kind of lean towards just in a vacuum. But Brendan Hymas has been in the system. He's had time to adjust from college tackle to NFL guard. Jamari Sawyer has not had that opportunity. So this is going to be interesting to see who they ultimately choose. But for now, I think I would lean Hymas just because he's had more time to develop. He's had more time to practice the scheme. And I think he's a little bit more athletic too. So I would lean Hymas for the interior offensive line swing player.
Yeah, the most we can hope for Sawyer, unless somehow he plays right tackle, is that he, is kind of the depth guy and he works himself all the way up to becoming, the backup interior swing guy. But that's what Hymas did last year already. I think I know Sawyer's very exciting, and trust me, I want to see him on the field. But Hymas earned his way all the way up from the back end of the roster, kind of to work his way up to being that swing guy. Although he didn't end up because Calamete and Schofield or whatever. But during the offseason and during training camp, he looked good on the field. He earned the spot. So I think that, I don't know how much more we can expect from Sawyer to do over that. So I'll go with Hymas here, especially because of that year. I would not be surprised if Sawyer, though, was the extra inline tight end sort of guy that they bring in for certain packages.
Yeah, and please God, have it be Sawyer over Trey Pipkins last year. Those first 6 games when he was the inline tight end, that was not a fun experience. Yeah, I'll go with Hymas. I mean, it could be Sawyer, and this could be a situation where it sort of maybe changes midseason as Sawyer starts to get healthy, as he starts showing stuff in practice. But for now, Hymas does have a year in the system, healthier player at the moment, and not much else to say there. I also think he does have that. Sawyer kind of has that positional versatility too, but Hymas has kind of been going up against these guys, whether it's tackle in college and now, guard in the NFL. Yeah, I'll go with Hymas here, not by a lot, and it can certainly change by the end of training camp, but for now, I think he's the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if anything happens to Corey Linsley, what they would do there. I mean, they've shown in the past that they would just rather, plug the one hole as opposed to swapping 2 players' positions. But I'm just so intrigued at the possibility of Zion Johnson playing center that I would almost prefer him be the backup center, if you will. So, but I think it would just be Will Clapp comes in, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Fullback. This is the big one, of course. A very interesting story coming out yesterday from Pro Football Network about about Xander's agent and how he was able to just really stay in touch with the Chargers and theoretically leverage the Chargers into drafting Xander Horvath. I feel like this is pretty cut and dry. They drafted a fullback. I think they have to choose the fullback that they drafted. So for me, it's Xander's job to lose, and he's the better athlete. So I'm going with Xander pretty clearly.
Yeah, the dialogue surrounding who was going to win when they first drafted him was like, what is his role? Like, is he going to be a tight end? Is he Steven Anderson? Is he a pure fullback? Maybe he can be all those things, but the way the article, the Chargers talk kind of, you could read between the lines, like they needed a fullback and they wanted to get a fullback and they wanted to go get Xander Horvath to pay fullback. So it just sounds like, not that that's a surprise, but it's just like, okay, for sure. It's not like Gabe Neighbors is going to be your fullback. Horvath is going to be your Steven Anderson. It just sounds like Horvath is your fullback. And so, yeah, I'm going with the same guy.
But Horvath, so we each have bloodbath. Okay, there we go. It is. I've never heard somebody named Alexander, then therefore go by Xander. I wonder how that came to be about.
Don't know. There's no Z in the name, so that's a little bit perplexing. But I don't know. Maybe he just watched that one Vin Diesel movie.
Whatever.
Yeah, Xander Cage. Yeah, I think this is Xander Horvath, and it's kind of bolstered by the Pro Football Network story from yesterday, where the Chargers didn't want to draft a fullback. They didn't want to draft that position. But Xander, and the threat of him potentially leaving to another team in undrafted free agency, that got them to kind of pull the trigger with the 7th round pick. Again, we're talking about a 7th round pick salary here, and there's going to be tons of 6th and 7th round picks that don't make rosters, right? For whatever reason, just maybe they're beat out by somebody else. And it's I just looked it up at the spot track because I was curious. It's a $77,000 dead cap hit if they cut Xander Horvath. So it's not like it's the end of the world if Gabe Neighbors somehow won that battle. But I do think what they want to do with Horvath and the fact that Neighbors was a healthy scratch for large portions of last year, maybe it kind of ends up being that way for Xander too, considering we think they're going to keep 4 running backs, but it seems like they kind of want Xander to be more active and that they, really wanted him as a player, even though the Chargers have been more analytically inclined. We don't have Arjun in the chat right now, but I would guess that his stance is you probably don't draft a fullback, but you do like the player a lot, right? And that's clear from the Chargers standpoint. So yeah, this is Horvath. I wouldn't say it's impossible that he loses the battle. He very well could if Neighbors beats him out. I think they'll just go with whatever guy wins in the preseason, but for now it's up to Horvath at the moment.
Yeah, in terms of the article and LDE Bruin asking about which of the other AFC West teams would want him, the Chiefs and the Broncos don't or won't really use a fullback, so I think it was probably the Raiders, I'm guessing. Because the Patriots do use a fullback quite a lot. So that's the interesting one. I just think you can do more things with Xander because of his athleticism than you can with Gabe Neighbors. And we've seen, just more evidence of Xander having a role on a football team, whereas Gabe Neighbors was kind of like the 4th or 5th tight end, if you will, essentially H-back hybrid kind of player on Florida State. We've seen him carry the ball 2 or 3 times, I think, if that. So I just think you can do more things with Xander, and I think he's, because of his athletic profile, is probably the better special teams player. I guess a couple people asking this in the chat, if you cut Gabe Neighbors, are you keeping him on the practice squad? I'm not really. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but they didn't keep a fullback on the practice squad last year, so I think you kind of keep those practice squad spots for more developmental players or guys that you would elevate in a pinch to play games. And I don't see the point of keeping another fullback on the practice squad.
I guess if you designate him as a tight end, if Stone Smart's not healthy, he is your best practice squad receiving tight end. So it's possible he makes it for that. But yeah, I'm not torn up if they let him go.
I mean, he's Herbert's buddy. Just put him on the practice squad, and who cares? That's kind of my stance on it. Obviously, you would kind of want the practice squad to be all of the depth positions you might need to activate for a game, but who cares? Just keep them on the practice squad. I don't care at this point.
All right, we'll move on to the next one here, which is tight end. Obviously, you have Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, and Trey McKitty locked into the roster. Curious to see if there's any kind of sorting, if Trey McKitty maybe edges out Parham for tight end 2 is a possibility. But I think those 3 obviously all locked into the roster. So the interesting one is, of course, going to be if they keep 4 tight ends and who is that tight end going to be, or potentially, a practice squad tight end. So in that spot, you have Hunter Campmoyer, the undrafted free agent from last year out of the University of Oregon. Stone Smart, the undrafted free agent from this year out of Old Dominion. Unfortunately injured right now, some kind of foot injury that we don't really know a whole lot about. And then you have Eric Cromanhook from USC, undrafted free agent from this year as well. So, Alex, any thoughts in terms of Campmoyer versus Smart versus Cromanhook? If you had to pick one to make the roster, which area would you? So I'll let you explain yourself to the audio audience for those who can't see what you just typed in.
Yeah, I just typed in no in the box. Look, I don't think it makes sense to have a 4th tight end at this point. If Steven Anderson was still here, like that would be a legitimate, a reason to have one on the roster. And maybe one of these guys, whether it's Campmoyer or Cromanhook or Smart, proves themselves in training camp to be able to have that Anderson role as like a dual fullback tight end. But at the same time, they just used the pick on Xander Horvath. They're carrying 4 running backs. And now you have a tight end 1 that you have 3 tight ends that can effectively block in Gerald Everett, Donald Parham, and Trey McKitty. Everett and McKitty, I would say, are 2 really good blockers. Why do you need a 4th tight end at this point? If the winner of Campmoyer versus Smart versus Cromanhook, fine, put him on the practice squad. At that point, I think that's fine. I just don't see a real reason for having one of them on the roster at this point. And maybe the training camp or preseason changes my mind on that. Maybe Stone Smart gets healthy and shows us some of those flashes that we saw or that was reported in minicamp. But for now, I think that it's 3 tight ends.
Yeah, I think it's 3 tight ends. My excitement here took a real nosedive with that picture of Stone Smart. I hope he's fine soon, because I think sounds like he had a really nice start to his very, 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 very brief career so far. Campmoyer did take 3 snaps last year, a whopping 3 snaps on the field. So, he did play against the Broncos, and I was surprised. I was watching, just film, and all of a sudden he pops up in garbage time. So, hey, maybe they view him as an H-back, but nah, I think this is a 3 tight end sort of deal. You have to chop off something somewhere. And sure, it could be linebacker, it could be quarterback, it could be running back, but no, let's get rid of a tight end, which I feel is far more useful in this offense. But I think this is where they're going to make one of their cuts.
Yeah, I think really last year we probably would have seen them keep just 3 tight ends if Trey McKitty were kind of healthy entering the year, because we've heard from a few reporters that was kind of the issue in divvying up the roles, was that McKitty wasn't necessarily 100% healthy, was still kind of rehabbing from the knee surgery that he had at Georgia. So I think you could see them keep a 4th tight end, maybe for like special teams purposes. And maybe that 4th tight end is like your neighbors of this year, who you keep kind of as a healthy scratch, depending on what is happening around the roster. So I would have, really been intrigued to see Stone Smart get that chance to improve upon his mini camp performance, because that really was like the area where if one of these guys was going to potentially carve out a roster spot, was like, okay, who's going to be able to impact the passing game outside of being a blocker? And Stone Smart was that guy. So, I mean, Hunter Campmoyer has a good special teams profile. He's a good blocker. He was a defensive end at Oregon for a little bit. So he has kind of that edge there. If they do want to keep a special teams player, that's where I would lean. Eric Cromanhook, not much of a receiver at USC. He was basically, an H-back tight end kind of a guy. So him and Hunter Campmoyer, very similar players. So if there was going to be one that could separate, it was going to be Stone Smart. But I think for me, I would say if I had to pick one, I think I would pick Hunter Campmoyer just because of special teams.
Yeah.
But I think they ultimately end up going with just the 3.
I agree. And I was doing some random search, and I believe Joe Lombardi, and granted, he didn't have roster control at every spot, but I think the last 3 years with the Saints and then 2 years with the Lions, it was always 3 tight ends and a fullback. I think the one year was 2 tight ends and a fullback. The only time they've ever had 4 tight ends was last year with the Chargers. So I think that that's what we're going to see.
Well, they also had Taysom Hill, so
you're right. You're right.
We have a Taysom Hill. His name's Easton Stick.
All right, that's it for the offensive side of the ball. We'll move over to the defensive side of the ball. I think this is much more interesting in terms of carving out the roles and things like that. So we've already been here for 50 minutes, so I guess strap yourselves in. All right, for defensive tackle, I think we all can agree Sebastian Joseph Day is locked in as DT1. He's the guy that essentially, in my opinion, is never going to leave the field. He is the Justin Jones of this team, if you will, when Justin Jones was healthy. So outside
Austin Johnson in the list.
Nose tackle.
Was that Alex?
Okay, nose tackle. All right, I was just wondering how we were differentiating that. Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, so I do agree with Tyler that Austin Johnson is probably going to be your nose tackle, and Sebastian Joseph Day is going to be the one that kind of moves around the spots. All right, so for this exercise, we have DT1B up for grabs. That essentially means your DT2, essentially, who's also going to be the starter when it comes to nickel packages when they go to 4 defensive linemen as opposed to 5, who's kind of going to be that primary second defensive tackle who's going to play a lot more snaps. Then we have DT3, DT4, and potentially DT5 after that. So, of course, in this group, you have Jerry Tillery, Morgan Fox, Joe Gaziano, Tito Obonia. Oh, so you have this as not – so Austin Johnson's not in this conversation.
Nah. He'll split up with the nose tackles later.
Okay. So this is not Austin Johnson. That's my mistake. My bad. All right, Tyler. So where are you leaning at in terms of that other 3 tech?
I'm so bummed I have to go first. Okay,
well, one of us could go first if you don't.
No, it's fine. Okay. I just I have to will this into existence, and I have to agree with Madden. Please, for the love of God, make this happen. I hope that Morgan Fox is your starter over Jerry Tillery. If nothing else, just because I want to see something different. And frankly, if Jerry Tillery were like a 40-something, pressure guy and was just too good of a pass rusher to take off the field, sure, I could see him being the starter. And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if Tillery were the starter in week 1 because, they did everything from letting him sit out the preseason to changing their entire defensive scheme and how they played to make Jerry Tillery and Kenneth Murray succeed. So I really think that there's a strong chance that it is Tillery. I got to will it into existence, though. I'm going to go with Morgan Fox, and I do think he is good enough to take the job. It's not like this is Tillery versus Otito, and it's like, well, Otito could be good, but he's not going to, start week 1 his first year. Morgan Fox is a veteran with Staley. He is good. He's at least as good of a pass rusher and a better run defender. So I think to me it is Morgan Fox, and I hope it is.
Yeah. I think, when did they sign Morgan Fox? Was that May or late May after the draft?
It was right before minicamp, so it would have been
right
May,
before minicamp. Yeah, so for the longest time, even after they declined the 5th-year option on Jerry Tillery, which we all knew was going to happen, it still was like, oh, well, Tillery's still your best pass rusher available. And then they signed Morgan Fox, and I think that really changed the perception on what Tillery is. I'm going to put Fox as my DT1B as well. That just seems to be the direction that things are headed. I actually don't think there's a strong chance that Jerry Tillery is DT1B at all. I don't think he's anywhere near the cut line. There have been some roster projections where Tillery gets cut or something like that. I just don't think they have the ability to do it because who are you replacing him with? Like Eric Banks? I don't know if you want to call him or something.
No.
there's not a whole lot left to replace him with. And so, Tillery is still going to be an important part of your pass rush. Hopefully it's the last year we're saying that. But to me, the Chargers let you know how they felt about Jerry Tillery when they declined his 5th-year option. And that to me is it at the end of the day. And if you bring in Fox, who's a guy that has Staley familiarity, is a better run defender, equal or better pass rusher in some respects, I think that's the end of the conversation at the end of the day. Had they picked up the 5th-year option, I would think differently, but they didn't. So, I mean, to me, that's why Tillery gets knocked down to the DT3 spot in this exercise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I completely forgot about the 5th-year option declined part. Yeah, because if it was picked up, not a conversation. Probably not even a conversation, but it is. Oh, I see what Alex is doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Knew it, Steven. I know you're going to put Tillery at DT1B. I saw your face the entire segment. I saw your face. I know.
Like I really wish that this is the case. Like I mean, I have this as my name, right? I want Fox over Tillery, and I totally see what you guys are saying. Like a lot of people will say, like, this was, pushed on them by the front office. Like, we heard from a few people within that building that there was just kind of an accountability problem last year, and I hope that has changed. I really do, but it's kind of I'll believe it when I see it thing. I just think that they're gonna try and continue to make Jerry Tillery a thing. I absolutely think that Morgan Fox is going to have a role, but I think that Tillery is still gonna be, a quote unquote starter and play a lot of snaps for this team, and then they'll just essentially move on next year.
You're probably going to be right, but I could not will myself to put Tillery at DT1B. I had to throw that out there into the universe and hope it stuck.
I think had they not signed Morgan Fox in quite the way that they did, like, almost immediately after they signed Bryce Callahan, and like when they were kind of going through that week where they just signed Staley's guys, and it was viewed as a post-draft hole for them immediately after declining his option, that just signals stock down to me. I would not be shocked if Tillery is the guy week 1, but the fact that we even are having like conversations about the cut line in some way, and the fact that the tone in the building seems to have changed on Jerry Tillery dramatically from week 1 last year to declining his 5th-year option now, I think they value Fox in that spot probably.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think we could certainly see a phasing out throughout the season.
Yeah.
But I just think, they're going to see some flashes again in training camp. Like, that's the thing with Jerry Tillery, is that he's super inconsistent. That is absolutely a problem. But when he does play well, like he does play, like he has those flashes that, people can kind of talk themselves into Tillery being a serviceable player again. And, even against Zach Martin, when they were playing the Cowboys, like Tillery won some reps, and it was an impressive victory for him. And you're just like, man, why can't you just do this more often and not just be atrocious? That's the thing, right? It's like you see him get, destroyed in the run game by guys like Terrence Steele, and that clip that Theo Ash pointed out yesterday from the Giants left guard. And, like, you see those things on tape, but then you also see the good things. And I think Tillery's going to flash some really great plays in training camp. They're going to talk themselves into him, and then it's going to take like just a phasing out throughout the season. For me, is kind of how I see it playing out.
Yeah. Do you think both of them sit out the preseason?
I think Fox plays the preseason. I think Tillery plays sparingly.
Okay. I mean, that'll obviously tell us right there where things are trending.
Yeah. DT4, I think, is absolutely Tito. They drafted him. He's kind of that developmental project that, they need to see some things for. I think there is, some people think that he's kind of like the backup nose tackle, and he certainly could take some snaps at nose tackle. But I think you're trying to kind of set yourself up, set him up for success, and I think you're trying to avoid double teams as much as possible. So for me, I think you put him at kind of like a 3-4 technique to start out, let him kind of work himself into, if he is going to be a future nose tackle, I think he needs time to develop that. So but I think he is DT4 comfortably. I will say though that Joe Gaziano, every time he's in the games that I was watching, he made some good plays, man. I really wish they would give Joe Gaziano a chance, because He is a good player when he's out there.
Yep, absolutely agree.
All right, so for nose tackles, I think we all agree that Austin Johnson's kind of locked in as nose tackle 1. Behind him, they have Christian Covington, Brain Fehoko, Forrest Merrill. Andrew Brown did play a little bit of nose tackle against the Steelers, although he's kind of more of a 3 tech, but that's where he played last year. So, and like I said, Tito could take some snaps here, but I think they are going to carry 6 defensive linemen. I think they did learn that lesson last year. I think they need that depth. So this is really a Covington versus Fehoko battle for me. Alex, any chance you think Forrest Merrill can kind of, come out of the dark like he did last year and maybe seize this role?
Probably not. I'll say there's a chance of it in theory, just because we've seen him flash in some spots. And I mean, he did for just a few seconds make the final roster last year. So, I think the coaching staff does like him in the capacity that they have him, but I think they want to go with someone who is a little bit more of a mover than Forrest Merrill is. So I think they probably go with Covington or Fehoko. I'm going to say they go with Fehoko. I just think, and maybe it ends up being Covington because they, brought him back on his 1-year vet minimum deal. But I don't know. Covington just wasn't very good last year. I think that he was very bad. He was very bad. I think he gets the heat taken off of him because Tillery played and just our expectations for Tillery in some of those respects. But Christian Covington was not anything special last year. I still think if you're kind of like looking at this situation almost as if it's like, who are we? We were talking a little bit about like Trey Pipkins and Storm Norton a little bit in terms of the tackle spots. And, when you kind of look at these players as well, it's sort of a similar dichotomy. Braden Fehoko is 25. Christian Covington, I think, is turning 29. So if you're betting on one of those guys to like break out, again, how much can you really break out as a nose tackle too? But I still think you're looking at Fehoko to kind of have that upside. He's made it through, multiple kind of iterations of this team being on the roster, being on the practice squad. So I give it to Fehoko, and at some point, if we say that the Chargers are this like analytics-based organization and they value analytics and stuff like that, Fehoko is very positive and things like run stop rate, as Tyler keeps mentioning. So for me, I think Fehoko is the nose tackle 2. It could end up being Christian Covington, but at some point, and maybe they just view this spot as a body and they'll give it to Covington. But for me, I think Fehoko just shows you consistently more from rep to rep as a player. And Christian Covington was just downright bad at the end of last year. So I would go with Braden Fehoko here by quite a bit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think if you're talking about their performances on the field, there's no question to me that Braden Fehoko was the more productive player last year. And obviously the stats back that up, the film backs that up. Christian Covington had 264 snaps against the run. And he had 13 run stops. That's 5.1% stop percentage. Braden Fehoko logged 65 snaps against the run and had 10 run stops and basically 200 snaps fewer than Christian Covington. So his run stop percentage was 16.1%. Braden Fehoko did not miss any tackles. Christian Covington missed 4 tackles. Of course, you have, there's the more snaps you play, the more likely you are to miss a tackle. But even average depth of tackle, Braden Fehoko's average depth of tackle was 2.7. Christian Covington was 3.6. So in a world where you're asking this player to come in and contribute and really be an effective player, and I think like we're learning more about what the Chargers are trying to look for in their defensive linemen. And I keep on saying this, right? Like something that Sebastian Joseph, Austin Johnson do really, really well is they control their point of attack, and then they are able to shed the blocker and make a play on the ball. It was a big issue last year with Jerry Tillery, with even Justin Jones at certain times, with Linval Joseph at times. And it was a big issue with Christian Covington. He just can't do that. If you're asking him to be a little bit more aggressive and shoot gaps, I think Covington is more effective in that role. But if you're asking somebody to take on a blocker, shed that blocker, and then make a play on the ball, like that to me is Fehoko, like by a country mile. Like it's not even a close conversation. So this ultimately, I think, is going to come down to, do they want a more veteran presence? Do they want a younger presence because they have, it is a relatively young room. Austin Johnson's kind of the elder statesman, if you will, but even he's not super old. So do they want a veteran like Covington? Do they want a younger player like Fehoko? I don't know. I think this should be Fehoko, but I just have this seed of doubt that they don't view him the same way that we all do and the way that the analytics do. And I think part of me thinks that they're just going to choose Christian Covington.
This is so tough, man. I do think when you're talking about pass rush versus, or just a pure run stopper or whatever, I do think because they're likely expanding it to 6, that you kind of can have a more specialized guy like Fehoko who's literally just going to be a run stopper. Whereas before, like, you needed Covington because if, this person went down, then he'd have to slide it to maybe play some defensive tackle or maybe be a pass rusher or be Linval Joseph's backup. But now because you have 6, I feel like you can add that more specialized Braden Fehoko. Yeah, I want this to be Fehoko so bad. I do want the youth movement. I want it for, not that Covington's a bad locker room player or anything, but like I want this for Fehoko and I want this for the locker room. And I want, that I feel like it would be good culture building if you won a job because he's, fought through being an undrafted free agent, fought through one regime, fought through the next regime, cut. But every time he's on the field, he makes plays. I mean, it's sort of almost an Adrian Phillips kind of route where it's like, oh man, like he a lot of trouble to start his career because he just couldn't stay on the field because they kept cutting him. But man, like you saw some plays and it's like, man, you should give him a little bit more. And Staley right down the street has Greg Gaines as an example of what you can do if you just work with a guy who's, puts up decent numbers, but, not in a big set yet, and keep developing him on the way to. Greg Gaines had 38 pressures this past season. Now, I don't think Fehoko will have that this year if he had the same role, but I want them to be able to develop him and show the roster that you can earn this. Like, I'm not just only going to go with the veteran guys or only my guys. Like, if you show out and you earn this, you'll get it. But I still think it's Covington, and it hurts my soul to say that. I really wanted to go Fehoko, don't get me wrong. And listen, I'd be all thrilled for it. This whole interior defensive line situation last year felt like who I prefer personally for the coaching staff versus maybe who was better. And I think that I'll have to see that change this year. There's plenty of guys that should have been there over Banks, but it was the guy that they wanted personally that was there. And I think Covington is the guy that they have some sort of a little bit more personal attachment to, I think.
Yeah. So a couple of people asking about Fehoko potentially being on the practice squad. If he gets cut, I don't think he's sticking around. I think
he's not.
If you're cutting people and bringing them back to the practice squad, you're talking about maybe Joe Gaziano at this point. I don't know if he would want to stick around either. But Forrest Merrill would be that guy. Andrew Brown probably would be that guy. So I'm doing the Tillery Fox thing here. I'm putting Fehoko just because I want to will this one into existence. But like I said, just a small part of me really thinks that they're going to choose Christian Covington.
They could very well choose Covington. I'm also kind of going off Fehoko on the basis that I've heard Staley say more positive things about him, and maybe that ends up being nothing, right? I mean, coaches, there's coach speak all the time, but never really heard, Brandon Staley talk about Christian Covington in the way that he has with Braden Fehoko when it comes to, calling him things like a multiplier, right? He does everything right for the defense and allows plays to, keep on multiplying and, get, better run blocks and all that stuff. So for me, I just lean towards Fehoko here because of what we see in the analytics, but also if we're evaluating the coaching staff and what they've said about these things too, I do think they favor Fehoko, but we'll see.
I'll move on to the linebackers here, a position where I feel like there's nobody really like locked into a role. I think you obviously have players locked into a roster spot. You know, Kenneth Murray, Drew Tranquil, Troy Reeder, I feel like are absolutely making the roster. Eamon Ogbongbemiga, we had heard some really good things about in the offseason before they signed Troy Reeder. So maybe he potentially is locked into a spot. Nick Neiman, they drafted last year. He's kind of their special teams guy. So maybe he's locked in. And then you have Cole Christiansen, you have Damon Lloyd, Tyreek, Maddox Williams, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Maddox Williams, the undrafted free agent from Rutgers, right?
That's the one.
There we go. So, of course, a lot of this up in the air with Kenneth Murray in terms of his health. You know, he posted a great screenshot on Instagram yesterday doing some mental health walks. So I love that, you know, Kenneth Murray is advocating for himself, you know, taking the chances and doing the necessary steps to make sure that he is mentally well, which I think is fantastic to see a professional athlete do those. So I talked about this the other day. For me, linebacker 1A, it has to be Drew Tranquil for me. I think he is the player that I trust the most in this regard, in terms of playing and filling that role and making plays as a pass rusher and defending the run, and just how much of a good communicator he is. So I think for me, Drew Tranquil is linebacker 1A. The rest is a lot of up for the grabs and question marks for me.
I have to completely disagree. I don't see how there's any chance, unless Murray's leg falls off, that he's not LB1A. I think Tranquil will start as the 1B, but I just think that, like, no way. I don't see it with Tranquil. If they review the film last year and say that Tranquil was better, I would completely agree. I just don't believe that he would be the 1A, especially with the way things finished last year.
Yeah, I have to go with the Kenneth Murray too. Would it shock me if Tranquil was 1A? I guess if you're saying just strictly from starting the season and who's healthy, maybe not, right? Just because we'll see later this week if Murray's put on PUP or anything like that regarding his injury and whether he's able to go from the beginning. But I still think, look, Kenneth Murray is a first-round pick. We've seen what coaching staff and the people in the building think of him. I think you probably have to pencil in Kenneth Murray as linebacker 1A, regardless of whether he's earned that or not in this point in his career. It's almost like they have to have Kenneth Murray work out. So for me at this point, you know, you still pencil him as linebacker 1A.
I don't want that to happen, man.
I
think Murray needs some time. I think he really needs to like work through some things.
Yeah. I'm not saying he doesn't need time, but at this point, like, it's kind of sink or swim, right? He's a first-round pick, and you have to throw him out there as your linebacker 1A for what he was drafted to do, right? And so they just have more invested in Murray than they do Tranquil at the end of the day.
Wrong, Speedy. You are absolutely correct. Derwin James is the best linebacker on the team.
And a lot of things.
A lot of other things. He'd probably be the best tight end on the team for all we know, man. The guy's a freak athlete. So 1B, I guess I'll put Murray there. I mean, I don't know. In terms of like starting the season, I do feel like it's going to be Tranquil and Reeder, and then Murray kind of works his way back into that role. But I guess you guys are kind of swaying me there.
I mean, listen, they went with the flow last year with this position group. It was Murray, it was White, and then Murray kind of got hurt, and then they said, we kind of like this White Tranquil, pairing. So if Murray's not starting the season, which is possible, because he's hurt, and Tranquil and Reeder just look really, really good, and they're shutting down Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Josh Jacobs or whatever. I mean, maybe you don't have it. Like, what are you supposed to do? So I guess Murray will be back at edge or something by week 3.
Oh God.
Oh, jeez, if that happens. I'm gonna go Reeder as linebacker 1B.
Yeah, I could see that.
Now, this gets kind of complicated with how we're interpreting this because Kyle Van Noy, obviously we don't consider him a linebacker, but he's going to be playing some linebacker as well. So you do have to consider that and factor that into the linebacker position, even though we're more classifying him as an edge to this point. But Troy Reeder, even though I don't think he's very good at football currently, does fit the vein of what Brandon Staley did with Bryce Callahan. He fits the vein of what Brandon Staley did, as we were talking about earlier in the show, with just some of the guys they picked up this offseason. So for me, I think Reeder, just in terms of how Staley wants to utilize him, probably is the linebacker 1B. Again, him and Tranquil, I think, are going to get pretty comparable playing time. I don't think it's by a lot that one is like linebacker 1B and one's 3. It could be 1 and 2 situation or 2 and 3, however you want to put it. But I do think Reeder is going to play more significant snaps and isn't just a depth signing. He has, even though I don't think he's as good as Callahan or Morgan Fox per se, I do think he gives off those vibes in terms of how they want to use him in a Staley system. And considering Tranquil, might play some special teams, considering Tranquil's entering the last year of his deal, I think they lean Reeder over Tranquil. But maybe Tranquil convinced him on his podcast. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just revisiting a lot of these numbers here for a second.
Oh, don't.
In terms of the current Chargers linebackers, Kenneth Murray had the highest missed tackle rate at 19.4.
Jesus.
Which is fantastic. Troy Reeder was second on that list at 14.1. Where's Drew Tranquil at? I can't find him. Kaiser White's missed tackle rate was fantastic. Drew Tranquil's missed tackle rate was 5.9.
He's still not starting, Steven.
Drew Tranquil's missed tackle rate was the 10th best in the league among every linebacker that logged 20% of the snaps. What are we doing here?
I mean, Jerry Tillery and I would probably have the same run stop rate, but Jerry Tillery was out there for like 80% of the snaps.
Again, I don't think you're wrong, right? If you just, put a person with a blindfold on and you just read the numbers to them, they would probably select Tranquil as the linebacker 1A.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that's how it's gonna work, with considering how much they have wrapped up in Kenneth Murray. They just need him to succeed. This is kind of the space Tillery was entering last year. So it's a sink or swim season for him, and I think they have to at least allow him from the start of the season to see what he has.
All right. Well, I hope this is... Murray can play a lot, man. I need Tranquil over Troy Reeder at minimum. But
yeah,
we'll see. In terms of the young guys, how do you guys see it? It looks like Tyler has Neiman as LB4, Alex put Ogbongbemiga as LB4. So I think you guys are both putting it different ways. Any chance that they cut a linebacker 5 and only carry 4, do you guys think? Because I think it is, Kyle Van Noy, potentially some linebacker. I think that could cost probably Amen a job because Neiman's special teams is value.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them going for linebackers. The 5th is mainly, I think they're going to keep Neiman for sure. I think Lindsey Theory did the projection where they cut Neiman, but he's just too important on special teams. I think he'll get some more playing time this year too. But yeah, I could see Ogbongbemiga getting cut if, Kyle Van Noy is going to be playing more linebacker than we currently think. So they could go for linebackers, but ultimately Neiman's on the team either way. So yeah, I do think if push comes to shove, then it would be Ogbongbemiga losing the job.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think they're going to go with 4 linebackers, and I think they're going to find a way to keep both Dean Leonard and Jasir Taylor on the roster. Whereas we were kind of thinking of like one or the other. Well, them along with maybe like a Tavon Campbell and Keemon Hall.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, lots to sort out on the back end of the roster for sure. I will move on quickly to the last few positions here for the secondary. At outside corner, of course, you have J.C. Jackson locked into his role as CB1. We talked a little bit about the CB2 battle between Asante Samuel Jr. and Michael Davis yesterday. We'll dive in a little bit more today. And then you have CB3 outside. So for me, that's like Tavon Campbell, Dean Leonard, and then kind of the loser of Asante Samuel Jr. and Michael Davis, and then CB4 as well. So I said this yesterday. I'm going with Asante Samuel Jr. as CB2 on the outside. I think he just gives you a higher upside, a higher floor at this kind of point. You drafted him, you spent a top 50 pick on him. You have to develop him. And he showed a lot of really good things last year, particularly in terms of his ball skills, in terms of his recover ability. I think just the concussions really affected him from like a personality standpoint. We didn't really see him be the same kind of aggressive corner that we saw in the first part of the season and in college. So I think he gets back to that. I think after training camp, like this is Asante's job by a wide margin for me.
I don't know. I'll go with wide margin, but I do agree with you guys. I did say it was Davis to start the offseason or whatever, but yeah, I think it's ASJ. And deservedly so. I love ASJ.
Yeah, I think you go ASJ on the outside. And Michael Davis is still going to play a lot. Like, that's a distinction. Yeah. No matter how you number these guys, whether it's Davis as CB2, ASJ as CB2, I still think my light fell. Depending on how you rotate these guys in and out, I think that you're going to still need Davis, especially, for example, in those first 2 weeks where they play Travis Kelce and they play Darren Waller. You're still going to need Michael Davis on the field, even though Derwin James will take some of those matchups as well. But I would still say that ASJ, again, because of the pick you invested in him and because of some of the flashes he showed before he got hurt last year, he's CB2, I think, on the outside.
Yeah, we all think Michael Davis is safe on this roster, right?
Yeah, I see the comment from Beach Bum 7568 that he could be a surprise cut. I just like why? Like,
no,
you don't have any...
There's no incentive to cutting him. Like if they were to cut him, they would have done it earlier in the offseason, or they would have traded him or done something. But you lose depth by cutting him, and you can cut him next year and save $7 million anyway. So there's no incentive to doing it.
I mean, you're listening to Brandon Staley talk in the offseason about like we need to get deeper in the secondary. We're always going to be looking for cornerbacks. I think if you cut Michael Davis, then you're in the same position that you were last year, just with like a better CB1 and JC Jackson. So you would be essentially locked into JC, Asante, Bryce Callahan as your starters. But then if and when Bryce Callahan gets hurt, then you're asking Keemon Hall, Jasir Taylor to be a starter. And then you're in the same position as you were last year in terms of your depth, where you're just kind of searching for answers. And I think you have a legitimate answer in Davis as your CB3. And I think like he's too valuable to cut at this point.
Absolutely.
All right. In terms of the CB4, you're talking about Tavon Campbell, Dean Leonard. We talked a little bit about this a few times. I think the conversation here is similar to some other conversations. How much do you want a young guy that you can develop versus the veteran that you know and you potentially trust to kind of exceed in your role? And I think Tavon Campbell did play some good football over the last 2 years as a backup cornerback, but Dean Leonard is your draft pick. Dean Leonard is your younger player. I said this yesterday, basically never played man coverage. So he is as raw as it gets in terms of a developmental project. So Tyler, we'll start with you. Where are you leaning in terms of Leonard and Campbell?
It's really tough. But like I said a bit ago, I actually do think that they'll go with 4 linebackers and find a way to keep both Campbell and Leonard, or Hall and Leonard, I guess. But I think it's worth keeping both, even though I don't feel great about Campbell starting at any point in the season, kind of like a Christian Covington. I still do value what he has in his role. But between those two guys, between Leonard and between Campbell, I'm still leaning Campbell until I see more from Leonard. And I do want to see more from Leonard. I appreciate what he's done so far. It sounds like he's been great, but I got to see a little bit more. And over the next few weeks, I will be able to see it in person. I just think Campbell brings enough, and they did think highly enough of him. I think Campbell is going to be, if I had to pick someone to win CB4, I think it's Campbell.
Yeah, this is maybe the position on this roster where I think training camp and preseason determines it the most, honestly. Like if you're going with a tiebreaker type scenario, I'll go with Tavon Campbell just because of what we've seen from him at times. I also think you can afford to put Dean Leonard on the practice squad. If it comes to that, you can carry him on the roster too if you want to go with 5 outside corners. So they still have flexibility there. I just think ultimately, right, we saw ASJ get hurt last year. We've seen Michael Davis and ASJ both get benched at points. I think they value having the veteran here as opposed to Dean Leonard. I still think they like Dean Leonard obviously a lot as a prospect, enough to draft him. But for now, for 2022, I would say pretty clearly Campbell.
Yeah, in terms of like what we've seen from the Chargers last year, right? Like, Brandon Faison headed into the training camp last year as kind of like the starter. And then Asante Samuel Jr. and Tavon Campbell were kind of like your backups. And obviously we heard a lot of positive buzz about Asante. We didn't really ever hear a ton about Tavon Campbell. We heard a lot about, I totally just blanked on his name.
Brandon.
He's on the Jonathan Brandon. That's the one?
Yeah.
The one that got cut. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we heard like, oh, he's having all these interceptions, all these pass breakups, like he was getting all this buzz, and they still chose Campbell. And I think rightfully so at the end of the day. So I think it would take a lot for Dean Leonard to win this position battle and like be locked in as CB4 over Campbell. But I do think there is a chance that they still keep him. Like he is like there's a lot of athletic upside here for sure. Would have to work some things around, but them keeping 7 cornerbacks, I think is definitely not out of the question. I think it is a possibility, but I think in terms of this specific role, I think I'm going to go with the veteran and go with Campbell.
Yep.
All right. Slot cornerback, the second slot cornerback, if you will, really kind of third, I guess, depending on how you feel about what they do with Asante, how much they put Derwin in the slot or Mark Webb or whatever. But this is Jasir Taylor, Keemon Hall. I think it's pretty clearly Taylor for me. Keemon Hall did have some good moments in preseason. There were a couple of good plays that he had. Was it the Steelers game that he played that he was called up?
Oh boy, I don't remember.
But no, it was the Giants game. I just watched it. Yeah, he had a couple good plays against the Giants. I like what he brings to the table as a blitzer in particular, but I think they drafted Taylor. I think I trust him more in coverage, so I'm going with Taylor for this second slot corner spot.
Yeah, I'll go with Taylor as well. I don't think there's too much surprise here. The only thing I'll say is because we did hear that report that Keemon Hall is kind of working in that gunner role on special teams with Jalen Guyton. If they don't want Jalen Guyton to play special teams because he'll still play a significant enough role as a wide receiver 3 or 3B, maybe you keep Keemon Hall in that case and just have him as the gunner. But it's not like Jasir Taylor might not, can't play that role particularly either if they want to keep him. Jasir Taylor was the draft pick. They gave him a 4-year deal. So I think for all intents and purposes, you just have to put Taylor in that slot, but I wouldn't be shocked if they find some way to keep Keemon Hall, or they keep Keemon Hall on the practice squad and maybe they elevate him some certain weeks if Jalen Guyton gets hurt and they need a gunner or something, whatever.
Yeah, I know Darius Swinton really liked him in terms of his special teams ability. I don't know if that's enough to...
Based on the film, I liked his special teams ability a little bit less.
All right, move on to the safety position. Of course, you have Derwin James and Nasir Adderley locked in. Team drafted JT Woods this year in the 3rd round. They drafted Mark Webb last year, Alohi Gilman the year before that. And then Ben DeLuca was an undrafted free agent last year as well. So I think for me, safety 3 pretty clearly is JT Woods. I think this is going to bring a lot of versatility to this unit and really give them more options in terms of what they can do in the nickel, what they can do in dime, and just give them a premier athlete back there. I really like the potential of Adderley and Woods as your 2 deep safeties and allowing Derwin James to be around the box a lot more. I think that is going to be a lot of fun. So Woods clearly for me, safety 3.
I concur. I concur with Alex's next pick.
Yeah. I think this is pretty clearly Woods and Webb. Sad for, Alohi, I guess. But to me, if you keep 4 safeties on this roster, the coaching staff has just praised Webb quite a bit more. I think Webb, when he's been on the field, and there's not really like an injury tiebreaker here, right? They've both been hurt at times. So for me, I think you lean kind of with the upside there. Also a pick of the Staley regime, Gilman a pick of the Lynn regime. So I think it's pretty clearly Woods and Webb.
I will say I'm curious what his health status is going into the year.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
when I go to training camp, is Webb even playing? So we'll see what his health is.
Yeah, that's the thing with Webb right now. I think in terms of skill set, in terms of talent, absolutely favors Webb for me. I think Alohi Gilman just really kind of struggles in this scheme. Like I think if you're talking about kind of a box safety guy who can be around the line of scrimmage, cover tight ends potentially in a pinch, that cover three scheme just fit Gilman better. But I think if you are talking about a scheme where you have to come from a too high shell, you shift through the traffic and you have to make plays on the ball, you have to cover the slot, you have to cover tight ends, you're just asked to do so many more things. I think that's Webb, and I just don't really trust Gilman's vision from way far back when he is asked to be a deep safety. I just think there's a lot of issues there. He's not really able to shift through or sift through traffic, excuse me, in the same way that a guy like Woods would be. For me, it's just kind of a vision thing that I don't trust with Gilman.
Sorry, this is random, but it just dropped. John Mechie was diagnosed with a curable form of leukemia. He's not playing this season.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Man.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is so sad. I mean, he comes off an ACL and gets leukemia.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it sounds like he's in good hands and it's a curable form and it should be fine, but awful situation. I can't believe that.
Yeah. Prayers up to him.
I can't imagine. You just never associate, somebody that age, with anything. So it's just, that's a bummer, but I'm sure the Houston Texans will take, I'm not going to finish that sentence. I meant it earnestly, but
I'm talking about the Texans. Let's trade for him so he can actually, get good care. But yeah, hopefully he's able to fully recover from this. I mean, at least it's that kind of leukemia, I guess. But
I'm sure the Texans will have that situation settled.
Yeah, you just never really associate, cancer with professional athletes like that. It's just, it sucks every time. I mean, they're in such good shape, right? Like, it's just sad. But hopefully he's able to recover. So that's the last one, right?
Yep. Ended on a happy note.
Full hour and a half of position battles. So if you are just watching this now, let us know what you think of all of these position battles and who you think is going to win. If you think that is going to be a surprise cut that we talked about, let us know. So Tyler, any final thoughts on the position battles on training camp as we head into the start of that on Wednesday?
Well, yesterday after a Q&A that was decided by the fans and we just answered fans' questions, someone said that we didn't cover the Chargers enough. I hope that our 93-minute episode was good enough for you. I don't know how much we talked about food, but I hope it wasn't too much for you. I'll be at training camp all week. I'll be there most days except for one Sunday and 2 Thursdays. So you can come say hi. I'm awful at remembering faces, but I'll be there with a pen and paper, binoculars, and optimism. So I can't wait to be there.
Yeah, it's true. Tyler did bring binoculars for both of us last year, and it was I made fun of him for it at first, but it ended up being very useful. So definitely go say what up to him. I unfortunately will not be able to make it this year. Packing and moving is going to be taking up my time over the next few weeks. So, but it's all good. Obviously, that's a good reason to miss training camp. Alex, any final thoughts here, man?
Yeah, excited for training camp. Excited to get into it. I'm sure by the time we actually get to the roster selections, there's going to be guys that we don't even know, like Eric Banks and all those post roster construction signings last year. But if we're just going with the guys now, this is what we believe is going to happen. Obviously, it could change over the course of training camp and stuff. But excited to finally get back to football and maybe talk about food a little bit less. But there should still be a 5 to 10 minute space reserved for that in the Saturday Q&As.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Saturday Q&As are, ask us about whatever you guys want. So, if you listen to other mailbag things, like I was listening to the Athletic Football Show, and they do a mailbag every single week, and they dedicated like 20 minutes to food in Chicago because somebody who is a fan of their show, like asked Robert Mays, hey, like what's the good spots in Chicago? So, it's a Q&A. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be all about football, but yeah, so obviously really excited about training camp starting this week. Have real content again. We are going to do a 53-man roster prediction, like full on, once we kind of have more updates, and probably after the final preseason game, we'll cover that. So lots of news and notes over the next few weeks, lots of breakdowns. Be sure to follow Tyler if you aren't already on Twitter. He's also going to be posting stuff in our Discord chat, which is exclusively for YouTube members. So be sure to join it up and sign in for that. So that's the one. A lot of final questions about the helmet. We don't know. Every NFL team has the chance to do that if they want to. The Chargers have not done that. So I think there's like 13, 14 teams that have already announced theirs. I saw one team announce theirs today. I think it was Washington, maybe.
The Bears unveiled an orange one today.
That's right.
Does it suck?
So,
it looks okay.
I saw that they called it like the pumpkin or something like that. But
I mean, it doesn't look bad with the orange jersey. Just hope Khalil Herbert can supplant himself as RB1 there with that helmet.
Always. So the Chargers will do one at some point, I assume, but I think it's supposed to be out before training camp starts officially. So we'll see. But yeah, you guys know as much as we do. We don't have any information on that one. So as always, if you are listening to this, please leave a rating or review. We do really appreciate that. If you're watching this, be sure to subscribe, turn those notifications on. We're going to have a ton of video content over the next few months as we get ready for the season. Lots of interviews, lots of exclusive videos from each of the three of us. I know Arjun's also going to training camp, so Arjun will be jumping back in the fold a little bit more as well. So stay tuned for all of that, and we'll see you guys next time.